In the sleepy town of Bramblewood, nestled in the shadow of dense, ancient woods, an air of foreboding hung over the land like mist. The town was unremarkable in most ways, save for the crumbling mansion that crowned the solitary hill on its outskirts, a mansion the townsfolk referred to only as Hollow Hill House. Though no one had lived there for decades, its sinister reputation loomed large, whispered about in hushed tones by locals over coffee or on nights when the wind howled through the trees. The stories were always the same: how the house had once been a grand home filled with warmth, laughter, and children's games. But tragedy had hollowed it out, leaving behind echoes of despair. Some said a family had vanished within its walls, their fate unknown, while others claimed to hear children's laughter emanating from the broken windows at night. Laughter that turned to wails of terror if you listened long enough. Jake, Sarah, and Mark had heard these tales all their lives, but like most young people in Bramblewood, they'd never taken them seriously. That was until tonight. Twilight draped the world in hues of orange and purple as the three friends stood at the rusted wrought iron gate marking the boundary of Hollow Hill House. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the wind whispered through the trees, as if daring them to proceed. Jake the skeptic scoffed as he peered through the iron bars. "It's just an old falling apart house," he said, brushing his shaggy hair from his face. "People around here need to get better hobbies than making up ghost stories." Sarah, ever the believer, shivered despite her heavy sweater. Her wide green eyes scanned the darkened windows of the mansion, each one a blank, soulless void. "There's something wrong with this place. You can feel it," she said, her voice low. She glanced at the shadows stretching toward the house like claws. "We shouldn't be here." Mark, the thrill-seeker, grinned and gave Sarah a playful nudge. "Oh, come on, you two. What's the worst that could happen? It's just a bunch of creaky floorboards and cobwebs." He pushed open the gate with a screech that echoed into the twilight, his grin widening. "Let's see if the ghosts live up to the hype." Jake sighed and rolled his eyes, but Sarah hesitated. The unease gnawed at her, clawing at the edges of her mind. Still, she followed her friends as they approached the house. The mansion loomed before them, its towering silhouette framed against the dimming sky. Its facade, once white, was now a mottled gray, the paint peeling away in long strips. Vines snaked up its sides, creeping into broken windows, and the grand double doors were weathered and warped, as if the house itself resisted being opened. Mark was the first to step forward, placing a hand on the tarnished brass doorknob. "This is it," he said, his voice hushed with excitement. He shoved the door open with a groan that seemed to echo forever. The air inside hit them like a wall, thick, cold, and suffused with the smell of mold and decay. Dust motes swirled in the pale light of the moon, streaming through cracks in the boarded-up windows. The floorboards creaked under their feet as they ventured into the cavernous foyer, where an elegant staircase spiraled upward into shadow. A massive chandelier hung overhead, its crystals dull and coated in grime. Mark broke the silence with a mischievous grin. "All right, gang, let's split up and look for clues," he said in his best impression of a cartoon detective. Jake chuckled, but Sarah frowned, her unease deepening. "Splitting up in a haunted house? Great idea," she muttered under her breath. But Mark was already bounding toward the stairs. Jake decided to explore the ground floor, while Sarah reluctantly followed Mark up the creaking staircase. The air seemed to grow colder with every step, and a strange, oppressive silence filled the upper hallway, broken only by their footsteps. As they passed closed doors, Sarah thought she heard faint noises behind them, a rustling, a whisper. But every time she paused to listen, the sounds stopped. "This is creepy," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "It's just old wood settling," Mark replied, though his bravado seemed thinner now. He stopped at a door slightly ajar at the end of the hallway. The faint glow of moonlight seeped through the crack. "Let's check this one out." The room they entered had once been a child's bedroom. The faded wallpaper depicted colorful balloons and animals, but it was torn in places, revealing the wood underneath. A small bed sat in the corner, its mattress sunken and rotting. Toys lay scattered across the floor, blocks, a stuffed bear missing an eye, a broken jack-in-the-box. But it was the doll that drew Sarah's attention. It sat on a high shelf, untouched by dust. Its porcelain face was unnervingly perfect, its painted blue eyes wide and unblinking. Its lips curled into the faintest smile, as if it were pleased to see them. Sarah's breath hitched. She couldn't explain it, but she felt a pull toward the doll. Without thinking, she reached for it. "Don't touch that," Mark said, his voice sharp. But it was too late. The moment Sarah's fingers closed around the doll, the room seemed to shift. The temperature plummeted, their breath now visible in the air. A low hum began to vibrate through the walls, growing louder until it became a chorus of whispers. "Sarah!" A voice rasped, faint and distant. Sarah gasped, dropping the doll as if it burned her. It hit the floor with a dull thud, but didn't shatter. Instead, it lay there, its painted eyes now fixed on her. "What the hell was that?" Mark demanded, his voice cracking. Before Sarah could answer, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The whispers turned to anguished cries, filling the room with an unholy cacophony. The symbols etched faintly into the walls began to glow, their light casting strange, shifting shadows. "Let us out," Mark shouted, throwing himself against the door, but it wouldn't budge. The entire house seemed to groan, the walls pressing inward as if alive. Meanwhile, downstairs, Jake froze as the chandelier above him began to sway violently, dust and debris raining down. A deep, resonant sound echoed through the house, like the tolling of a giant bell. "Guys!" he called out, his voice shaking. But no answer came. Back upstairs, Sarah clutched the doll, her knuckles white. "They're trapped," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The children, they're trapped here." Mark shook his head. "What are you talking about?" Sarah's voice was distant, as if she were in a trance. "The family that lived here, their children were never found. Their souls are still here, in the walls, in this house." The glowing symbols flared brighter, and a wind swept through the room, extinguishing their flashlights. The cries turned into laughter, high-pitched and chilling. The shadows on the walls began to take shape, small figures with hollow eyes and twisted grins. They moved closer, reaching out for the three friends, their voices a chorus of despair and rage. In a desperate bid to escape, Sarah clutched the doll tighter. "We have to free them," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "We have to finish what was started." With Mark and Jake's reluctant help, Sarah formed a circle in the center of the room. Holding hands, they chanted words Sarah didn't recognize, but somehow knew, their voices rising above the chaos. The doll began to vibrate violently, cracks spiderwebbing across its porcelain surface. The room erupted in a blinding light, and a deafening scream tore through the air. When the light faded, the shadows were gone, the room silent. The doll lay shattered on the floor, its eyes lifeless. The friends fled the house without looking back, their laughter replaced with silence. As they reached the safety of the woods, Sarah glanced back at the mansion. For the first time, the windows seemed empty, but deep within Hollow Hill House, a faint giggle echoed in the dark.